Are you looking to improve the quality of your original cocktails? Well, if so, then I have some great tips for you that I think you're really gonna find useful. Welcome to Cocktail Limelight. I'm your host, Erick Castro, and today we're gonna be doing things a little bit different. You know, normally I make some cocktails, maybe touch a little bit of history, cover the build, how they taste, so on and so forth. Today, what I'm gonna be doing is going over some tips to help you make better cocktails. And by making better cocktails, I don't necessarily mean I'm gonna improve the cocktails you make, but rather the cocktails that are your own original creations. Whether you're a home bartender who makes cocktails for your friends when they come over, or a professional bartender working on a menu, I think you're gonna find these tips extremely helpful. Now let's dive into it, starting with tip number one. You gotta be brave, you gotta be bold, you gotta be wiser. I'm pretty sure those are song lyrics, but it doesn't mean that they're not equally important when you're creating cocktails. The first cocktail that you try to create on your own might not be very good, and you have to be okay with that. You have to be patient, and you have to understand that Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was the Manhattan. When you're creating cocktails, you're not gonna nail it the first time. You might not nail it the second time. You might not nail it the third or fourth. You have to give yourself some time to make mistakes, for you to reassess the cocktail and then come back to it. For instance, one of the cocktails that I'm known for is the Kentucky Buck. Some people have gone so far as to call it a modern day classic. Not my words, I'm not the one that said that, but lots of people do say that. But all cheekiness aside, that drink probably took me about 3 months to really put together. See how the story unfolded. The drink was pretty much mostly finished. It was already bourbon, strawberry, ginger beer, and lemon, right? It was pretty much 95% of the way there. So what happened is I was making the drink for friends and let them taste it. And everybody had their own opinion, and it was taking me down a rabbit hole. But as time went by, I realized like, hey, you know what? I think I'm just gonna add Angostura. Hit it with a couple dash of bitters, see what that does. And boom, that's when I started making it for people, and they would take a sip and be like, damn, this is really good, what's in this? And that's when you know that you're on the right path and you made the right choices in regards to the recipe. So basically what I'm saying is that you have to be patient with yourself, because you might not knock out of the park on the first try. Now my next tip is to familiarize yourself with the classics. To take it back to the Kentucky Buck as an example, the reason why I was even inspired to come up with that cocktail in the first place was I was reading so many old cocktail books, and I was seeing things like the Mamie Taylor, I was seeing things like the Dark and Stormy, and I was really going over all these recipes and playing in my head, and I was like, wait, when you look at all these drinks, it seems like you don't really see bourbon mixed with ginger in these old drinks, and I didn't really see anything with strawberry, you know, maybe apart from like a recipe or two, you didn't really see strawberry in a lot of old drinks. So that's when I really started thinking like, okay, hey, well, I live in California. You know, we have ripe, beautiful berries, you know, during so many different times of the year. Why don't I incorporate that into my drink? And I could only do that by looking at these old builds of drinks that had come, you know, freaking 100 years before. So basically, pretty much every drink is just a riff on the classics. So the better that you understand those drinks and why they work, the more likely you are to invent your own cocktail. That might even be better than some of these classics. Probably not. Nah, honestly, probably not. But you never know. My fourth tip is create lots of drinks. And by that, it's a little bit different than what I said about the patience thing, but it kind of works in tandem with that. And whereas the patience, I mean, rather when you're working on one drink over and over, what differs here is, I mean, make lots of drinks, make tons of different drinks. Because even the stinkers you make, some of the dogs that you crank out that aren't very good, you're still learning something from them. For instance, say you're working on a drink that's, you know, Oloroso sherry with aged rum and cinnamon. I don't know, right? Just making some flavors up. And the drink isn't going the way that you want it to go. It's not working, it's not coming out right. You know, you fool around with it for about 25 minutes, it doesn't take off. But fast forward 2 or 3 months later, and you're working on something else for an event, and you're supposed to come up with cocktails that are using sherry. And then in your mind you go, oh, you know what? You know what worked really well with sherry, I thought, was that cinnamon and the aged rum. And you might be able to take what you learned from that earlier drink that didn't work and apply it in a new format and find that it does work. I find that works out for me very, very often. Where I might have an idea that doesn't really take off, but I'm able to siphon off elements of it for a cocktail that is actually successful further down the line. So again, create lots of drinks. You're gonna learn something from the ones that don't work. In fact, you actually might learn more from the drinks that don't work. My fifth tip is know what you're looking for. By knowing what you're looking for, what I really mean is have a goal in mind. Why are you creating this drink? What is it supposed to fulfill? Because once you know what you're trying to do, it's gonna be easier to hit that target. Is this drink supposed to be a dessert cocktail? Is it supposed to be a pre-dinner cocktail? Is it supposed to be a Negroni variation? These are good things to know because then you know what you're aiming for. For instance, one of your coworkers or a friend of yours might taste a drink and go, oh, this is too sweet, and it's like really creamy and heavy, and you're like, oh, it's supposed to be creamy and heavy, it's a dessert cocktail. Ah, okay, that makes sense, right? A Brandy Alexander is a beautiful drink. That doesn't mean I'm gonna go to a happy hour and drink 3 of them in a row, right? That's just a lot of dairy. It's a lot of creme de cacao, right? But for the context of what that drink is supposed to be, a dessert cocktail, it's perfect. In the same vein, if you're trying to create, a tropical drink, you might want to stay away from certain flavors and veer towards other flavors. Basically, what I'm trying to say is know what you're aiming for so that you know in what direction you're headed. Because if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, you're going to end up wasting a lot of product and wasting a lot of time and just throwing a lot of drinks down the drain. And that's probably not something that your bar manager wants to deal with. My next tip is find some people whose palates and feedback you trust. For those of us who deal with cocktails all the time, who taste drinks all the time, taste spirits all the time, we can properly evaluate cocktails because we have the verbiage and knowledge to properly critique them. What you want to avoid is handing a cocktail to someone and tell them like, hey, what's some feedback on this? And they just say, it's not good. That doesn't tell you anything. Or on the flip side, they tell you that they love it. And then you ask them what they love about it and they also can't put their finger on it. This doesn't mean that their opinions aren't valid, but this early in the creation process, those opinions aren't that helpful. Ideally, you'll hand the drink off to a friend whose opinion you trust and they can tell you something like, oh, it's too tart or it's too sweet. That's feedback that's valuable and actionable. In the case of somebody who doesn't have the verbiage for it, they might not be able to tell you what it needs, and you're not gonna be able to really take anything from that you can apply to the drink. For those folks, I actually like to let them try the drink when it's completely finished and then see how they communicate to me whether they like it or not. But in the early stages, stick to people who have the verbiage and the experience with cocktails and spirits to really offer helpful advice. We're getting close to the end, but I still have a couple more tips. And one of those tips is know when to stop. Is because if you don't give yourself like a set time to R&D this drink or these multiple drinks, you're gonna end up treading water. You're gonna end up running in place and not really accomplishing much. This can be magnified in situations when you start to experience palate fatigue. I know all of us have been at cocktail tastings before when someone makes you 5 different versions, 10 different versions, 15 different versions of the same drink, and after a certain point, they're all sitting in front of you and you're like, I can't tell them apart anymore. They've become diluted and I lost track of which was which, and they're all different temperatures, and at a certain point, you can't even really trust your own palate. This can especially be the case if you're actually sipping and swallowing, because what's happening is you're getting a little bit of a buzz, so it's harder and harder to trust yourself. So in situations like that, what I would recommend is actually taking a walk or stepping away from the cocktail for about 25 minutes or an hour. Because in those situations, you're tasting so many cocktails back to back that you're actually just starting to lose track of what you're actually tasting and which ones you're liking more. So it's important to know when to stop and when to come back to it later. Another thing that's important to note is more ingredients doesn't always make a better drink. It's really easy when you're R&Ding a cocktail, when you're trying to create an original invention, to just keep adding things. And next thing you know, you're sitting there and you're looking at a drink that has 15, 16 ingredients. And you can't even tell what's contributing what to the drink anymore. And this is an easy pitfall for a lot of us to fall into. But one thing I like to stress, one rule I have when I'm creating cocktails is if I can no longer tell what the base spirit is in the drink, then I probably added too many ingredients. Remember, everything that you're adding should be complementing the base spirit. It should be highlighting the notes of the tequila. It should be showcasing the bourbon, the scotch, the gin, what have you. Once you can no longer tell what's in there, that's a good sign that you're like, yo, I probably put too many ingredients in this cocktail. One quote that has always inspired me was when somebody looked at Michelangelo's David, they actually asked him like, wow, you were so talented, how did you sculpt that? And Michelangelo replied, it's easy, all I did was take a big slab of marble and I just started chipping away everything that wasn't David. I like to think that that's how it works with cocktails as well. Sometimes in the early stages of a cocktail, I will add a bunch of ingredients, and then what I start to do is I take sips periodically. I ask myself what is an essential and what needs to go. And then I start pulling things back. And that's generally when I end up with the cocktail that I'm happy with. And now for the last tip, and that's keep detailed notes. When you're R&Ding cocktails, when you're creating original drinks, you really want to make sure that you're being methodical about things and keeping track of everything that you're doing. I can't even count the amount of times I've seen a bartender R&D a drink, I don't know, they've gone through 10 different renditions, 5 different renditions, and they're really happy with it. Don't write anything down. They come back 2 weeks later and have no idea what the hell recipe that they came up with was. And they'll come up to me like, hey man, remember that drink I was making like 2 Sundays ago? And yada yada. Do you remember if I ended up going with 2 dashes of Angostura or 2 dashes of orange bitters? And I just look and I'm like, no, I have no idea. You should have written it down. And that is a situation where I might say told you so. And the reason why I feel like this, and I'm a big advocate about being methodical in these situations, is I've been that bartender before. I've lost recipes. I've forgotten a drink that I was really happy with and had to redo it all over from scratch. So I've done what I can to make sure I'm keeping detailed notes so that I'm not wasting my time, my efforts, and my booze. And now I know I said that was the last tip. Well, guess what? I was lying. I actually have one bonus tip, and that's keep a log of ideas that you get. Because it's really easy to forget an idea, especially, in our industry where, people are drinking and what have you. I'm a big advocate of just keeping detailed notes in your phone, keeping notes on a notepad, maybe like a moleskin, whatever it is that you like to use and find most efficient for you, do that. When I have an idea for a drink, I just put it in my phone and just forget about it, generally. And then when it's actually time for me to like R&D or come up with some drinks, I will go back to those notes and, have my inspiration triggered by myself from the past who's inspired me today of the future or something along those lines. But basically, I don't know, say you're at a restaurant and you see a dessert and it says something like rum, raisin, butterscotch, creme brulee. You might say to yourself like, ooh, rum raisin, that actually sounds good. Maybe if I did aged rum with raisins and then notes of caramel or butterscotch, you could end up with something really cool. Just write that in your phone, then just kind of forget about it. And who knows, maybe like 3 months later, you need to come up with a dessert cocktail for a rum event. And you're like, oh, I'm gonna do raisins and rum with notes of creme brulee. Okay, cool, I'm on to something. And you're gonna make your job easier for yourself. And remember I said like, you might get inspired at a restaurant. You might get inspired anywhere. You might be inspired by anything. So don't be too worried about where your inspiration comes from, because you might be inspired by just about anything and everything around you, because that's just the way inspiration works. Well, that more or less wraps up this episode, but anyway, let me know if you like this one, because I know this format was completely different than pretty much any of the other episodes we've done, but I really felt that this was something that I wanted to tackle in an episode. And even though we didn't make cocktails specifically for it, I thought that the information in here was something that I really wanted to make sure I took a second to relate to all of you. Because creating and the act of creation can be deeply frustrating, especially if you're just flailing and you're going into it, I guess, undisciplined and without any methods to your madness. But none of these things are unique to me, and I didn't even think I really invented any of this stuff. I think this is just stuff that I've seen people do in other fields, and I've done my best to kind of compile them for bartenders to be able to apply in practice behind the bar making drinks. But I really do hope that you found some good information. Even if you heard all the tips and you kind of already knew a lot of this stuff, hopefully there was still like a couple nuggets of wisdom in there that you found applicable to your situation. But with that said, I'm sure that I missed a lot of tips out there that people out there might find useful. So if you have any that I might have skimmed over or didn't even touch at all, leave them in the comments below so that we can keep the conversation going. With that said, if you would like to dive deeper into the world of craft cocktails, be sure to check out the Bartender at Large podcast, which I host on Spotify, iTunes, and pretty much anywhere else where quality podcasts are found. Now, as usual, don't forget to muddle that subscribe button, and we will see you again next week.